So last time we ended up with these controllers like About Us, Contact and Homepage controllers. However, they are very simple. There is basically nothing in them. They're just there as a placeholder. And if we would add additional functionality to the, for example, Contact page controller, because we want this contact form of ours to actually submit data to our server, where we will then grab the data, validate it, and either send it or store it or do something with it. We can see that there is some duplication of code, and that is basically something we are trying to avoid. Duplication of code is our current worst enemy because it can introduce a lot of bugs and it can cause us to forget things when we are changing some things on some place. So we want to explore the object-oriented approach and see how we can benefit from it. Now this Contact Us controller needs some actions. It needs an action for showing the page, and it also needs another action for submitting a form. And the easiest way to achieve that is to have another parameter here that would be a action equals to show the page. And I need to put the and here. And by default it is doing what we asked it to do. It is displaying our form, and we will then just check this action from the get, right? And we will use the null coalescing operator here, and the default action will be show, for example. Then here we want to either show the form or if the action is actually submit, then we want to validate the form and send email or store the data. Then send email, and we might show the thank you page. We don't have this thank you page, but we can make it by copying the About Us page and renaming it to this. And here we will just change the thank you for contacting us. We reply in 2 business days. And now if we put our action to submit, we get this contact page. Now, to make this form work, we need to change it a bit. And here in the form, we need our action. Copy this. However, since our method will be post, we cannot submit to the URL containing additional parameters, so we need to put the hidden fields that will tell our web page what section and what action we want. So let's make those 2 hidden fields. Input. And we put the name section and the value contact. Now if you remember here, we are in our controller, we are checking on the get, and here in the form we are sending the post method, so this will be ignored unless we put the another check, which will then get from post. Now how does this work? Well, this null coalescent operator basically checks if this is null. If it's null, then it goes to the next one and checks if the post is null or nullable or it's empty, etc. If there is no value here, then it gets the final value default. It can go like this all the time, and it's much shorter to use this one. We could write this manually by writing the is set get action, and if it is set, then retrieve it. But the else would be if not set, then we would check is set the action, if not retrieve it. If nothing is set, then we will return this string called show. And it is our default action here, show, which is show the contact us. So it's basically a shorter way of writing bunch of is, if, else's, and nulls, and etc. And the same thing needs to be done in our index file, which is sort of our router for now, because the section we moved it to the post as well. So we will just copy this and change this to post. Oops. And if we submit now, let me just double check if these fields have the name, and they don't. So they need the name, which will be the email, and the value is empty in this case. And here, instead of password, we will change this to comment, right? We don't need a password field here. We need a text field. So let's change this to comment. Let's actually make it text. We don't need placeholder, and we don't need a type. And the name would be comment or message in this case. We don't need to remember me while we're here, and it will not be sign in. This will be, the button will be send. Okay, looking a bit better. Make a tutorial about the views. Well, that is a very good suggestion, and I will do it in the next videos. Let's send this one, and it doesn't work because let's echo our section to see what are we sending. We are sending contact section, however, our action is show again. So something is not right. And here, yeah, the action is show. It should be submit because that is what we did in our contact page here. So after we submit something, comment, it goes to thank you. We can remove this echo here. That is just a primitive debugging. In the next video, I was thinking to go over a bit more advanced debugging steps just to help you seeing the flow of the application. And now after being contacted, we are saying thank you for contacting us, and we'll continue with our lives. Now this if else and this action about getting the correct or the default action and the chosen action is something that will most likely be duplicated in all of our controllers. In About Us page, for example, we want to either show the company description, or we want to show the list of employees, or we want to show opening hours. So there is different actions that would fall into the same controller. And all that if else will after some time grow, and it will be difficult to maintain, as you've seen as I made the mistake. By simple changing the name of this post from section to something else, it will be very difficult to maintain it. Or if we decide to change the action or something, we need to go over all of our code and all of our controllers. And that is what we're trying to avoid. We want to keep our application cheap to maintain, or easy to maintain, basically by having things not being duplicated. This is a simple example, but it proves the point. So let's move this action from this controller to the main router, because it's sort of like a routing responsibility. If you think about it, it tells the application where the user is trying to go into the through the applications and through the controllers. So this should work just fine because this action will be included into this contact page, right? And since this is object-oriented tutorial, we want to reuse the objects to make our controllers as objects and to benefit from some of the object-oriented principles. So let's make this a class or an object later. And here we need two actions. Basically, one which would be show form, and I will put action here just so that we know it's an action. And this one will still do a very simple thing by displaying our contact form. The second one will be submit contact form action. And here we would do all that we plan to do: the validation, storing of data, submitting of sending a notification, email, etc., etc. For now, let's focus on the inheritance. So we don't need this if, which will basically be moved here. And here we will make our contact page object or contact controller. Let's rename this one to capital contact controller, like this. A good IDE will actually let you refactor from here by clicking on rename and then changing to the whatever you wish, and it will then show you all the changes that need to be done in the code so that you can confirm and change this name throughout the code. That's why a good IDE is a very good thing to have, rather than just the simple editor with find and replace, because there are contexts where this should be changed. Let's cancel this one, and now we are going to, based on this action, either show the form or we are going to submit the action. This should work if everything is great. Let me first just show the form, right? And the form is here, and let's type some message. We submit, we are sent to the thank you page. So this works as before. We have just basically introduced object and moved the code around, but there are zero benefits for doing it like this because we are not reusing anything. We will just have to do this all over the place for each and every action and each and every controller. Now these are basic controllers, but in a more advanced controllers, like in the administration, we would need to check some privileges. Does this user have a privilege to do this action? And we would need to run some pre-action check, basically. if we would continue like this, we will just put a bunch of code into this line here, into this file here, sorry, and it will be very ugly and very difficult to control. So we want to use some code that will automatically do such things for us. For example, before running this action, it should check for privileges. Of course, we could go in each of these functions here and put some additional code, but it's a very difficult thing to maintain. So thus the inheritance. And the basics of how inheritance work is sort of like in real life, where we have the parent object, which has some functionality, in our case the mentioned run action and the before action, also the render view, because in majority of our controllers, at least for now, we are going to render some HTML, we are going to output some HTML to our clients, and those are the actions that can basically be extracted for all of our controllers. In this case, they will be inherited from our parent to our children, where they would get all of those actions and even do some configurations, like in this case, they will put is the call an Ajax, for example, or they would have their own actions, like here, for example, in our contact controller, like show form action or submit form action. So each controller will have their own actions, but they will inherit some of the functionality from the parent. And in this case, our completed objects will look something like this. They will have all of those inherited actions from parents, and then they will also have their own actions or their own methods and their own configuration and parameters that can even override some of the functionality from the parent. But the main benefit here is that we can write this code once and then reuse it in all of our controllers, so we don't have to duplicate the code. So back to our code, what does this mean now? In our contact controller, we have some run action method, and in that run action, we are having some display of some HTML. And one way to avoid our logic here into our router, where we would check on each and every action of these, is to have one method that will be run action, and then we can just give it this post parameter or get parameter that our code is actually controlling, and then we can run that action directly from here without checking what its parameter is and what its associated method is. So let's just make one common method, run action, where we can show how this can benefit us. So let me start with our contact controller, where we will have a function run action, and here it will receive the action name. And then we can check if our method exists in this object. And if it does, we will just run this method by calling this, and then we will call our method instead of going individually from show form action to submit contact form action, etc. We are just going to do this dynamic action name and call it like this. And this will basically call whatever method we provided into this action name. Sorry, it should be action name here. However, we can even see that each action has an action as a suffix, and there is just some extra insurance to make sure that not all methods could be called as an action. So we will just append this action to this action name. So the action name will be whatever is passed here plus string action. So now we are actually just passing the show form and submit contact form, and the action will be automatically added here. And if the action is not found, we can actually use this to show the 404 page. And let's just try to see how that works. If we save this and if we go to our contact form, we have our form, and that is because the code is not using this method at all. So let's just implement this one. And instead of going through this if else, we are just going to blindly call the contact controller run action, and we will just give the action here. In this case, this is a string that is coming either from get or post. And we got rid of our if else or switch or whatever that is checking each and every action and each and every method that it should call. If we run this one, we are expecting to get an error because there is no such section, and we can even debug to see what's going on. There is no such action. If we just echo this action here, we can see that its value is show, and in our contact page, we try to run this action called show action, and it doesn't exist here because it's called show form action, and this will not even go into this if, but it will go into our else, where we can just display the page not found, which we can create from about us. Actually, let's make a new folder to organize things a bit, and let's call these status pages. And this will be our 404 HTML page, which will just tell us that page not found. And now if we save this file, we will get the wrong page. Because this needs to be status pages 404. And now we are into the page not found. Let's remove this show here. So now we have the else handling of our all the not found pages, not found actions. And what we need to do to make this one work is, instead of having the show, let's make this the something like a default action, for example, or index action is usually used. So this would be the index action. And here we can just say that instead of show, it will be the index, because now we are sort of not limited to the contact controller. We can use this action into about us and into the homepage, etc., in all of our controllers. So it makes sense to have the index or the default. Actually, let's make that default just to have it a bit different than all the other CMSs. And here we are going to put the default action. And now we don't have any action into get. And if I go here, we are still not getting it. And that might be because this, yes, and the action name here needs to be, this code needs to be moved above, because we are checking first and then executing later. If we execute now we are back into our contact. And we did so much work, but no visible improvement. However, we are now independent of our if-else's. We can just check once if this action exists or not. And now we need our submit contact as the action here. And let's see if our form works. And it doesn't. That is because we need to call it submit contact form. And now it works. And now let's just refactor quickly and do this for the About Us page, where we will convert About Us page into the About Us controller, just to have a bit cleaner index file. And have a default action where we are going to show the About Us page. Now here we would also make one contact controller. Well, actually not the contact controller, but the About Us controller. Let's rename this to a capital A. And into our About controller, we will also call our run action. But if we take a look at our About Us controller, we don't have a run action here, as we made it into our contact controller. Now we come back to our PowerPoint, where we want all of our children to inheritance functionality from their parents. In our case, we put our run action instead of here, we put it here. And this one basically sort of cannot extend this one, where it could, but it's not a good idea. So let's move our run action to a parent controller. And the way we're going to do this is we are going to make one folder here, which will be, let's call it a source. I don't have a better name, but we can remove it later. We can rename it later. And in our source, we will just make our new PHP class, which will be called a master controller or main controller, or we might as well just call it a controller. And here in our controller, we are going to put the run action. Now, if we run our contact controller, it will break because it doesn't know what the run action is that we are calling from our public place here. The same will happen if we try to run the About Us. So if we go to the About Us, it will show us that it doesn't know how to use this run action. It doesn't even know how to show us the 404 page we made, because it cannot find the run action. And to fix that, we are going to inherit or extend our controller. And we need to include it here. Or actually, because we're going to use this controller all over our application, let's include it here at the top of our router or index PHP. This inclusion will basically be moved one day to the bootstrapping of our application, and this logic here will be moved to the router of our application. For now, let's keep it simple. Let's just require actually the source controller. Actually, I don't like that this one is capital, so let's make this file lowercase. And now let's go back to the About Us, where we extend our controller. And if we try About Us now, it will work. What happened? Well, basically from our index page, we know that the section is not the home, but it is about, because we send it here. Our section is About Us, right? So our code knows that it should go into the About Us controller, where it will run the action. In this case, nothing being sent with the get, nothing being set with the post. So it must be the default action, right? And if we click on this run action, it is actually not into the About Us page. It is in our main controller, which About Us page extended. So the About Us page basically has the same functionality as having this copied from here and pasted into this one. So inheritance is a very practical way of inheriting the functionality and reusing the same functionality on several places. In this case, in About Us controller. Let me undo this one. And if we go to the contact page, let's see the contact page now. It's broken, but if we just extend the controller, and since we included it, there is nothing else we should do. It just works automatically. And even our submitting should work because it knows to execute our submit form action. And these principles are used all over the place in majority of frameworks, in basically all the frameworks, because they are so powerful and they allow you to reuse the code all over the place. The Laravel, for example, uses basically from the simple middlewares into controllers. Even the Symfony here, they have the what's called abstract controller or a default controller, where they have a lot of functionality that's being reused. For example, set container, get parameter, get the services, even has get and generate URL, forward, redirect. Let me zoom in. There is also functionality to add flash and check if attribute is granted and deny access, render view, the similar thing that we made right now, even the render and stream, etc, etc. So everything this is made into the one single controller, and you can easily use this functionality in entire your application without needing to write all of these common things over and over again. CraftCMS has similar thing when there is a controller. CraftCMS is basically made on the Yi framework, and it has the property which allows you to for the anonymous access to some function, to some methods or to some actions, and it has the mentioned before action and after action and run action. It can render template, something that we are sort of doing by running the display. You can set it to require login, require guest account, require admin access, require some specific permission, etc, etc. Some typical functionality is to output JSON or to output the API calls. There is a bunch of things that you can reuse in your controllers by making them once and then just reusing them all over the place. And these are just the basics. And in the next episode, we will open up a debugger and see how this code flows when we have the inheritance, because we are going to try to implement this before action, as mentioned before, where we will try to do some checking before each action is executed. And it requires bouncing back from the parent to the child, and it's easier to explain it into the debugger itself. Don't forget to subscribe, and I see you in the next lesson.